Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another SiteCare sponsored webinar for optical support staff. My name is Anthony Blackman, and you'll be listening to me for the next 50 minutes or so. Today's topic is around understanding body language. And so my background is as Director of Training at Insight Optical Training. So we're providing this session sponsored by SiteCare. I'm also a dispensing optician and contact lens optician in independent practice, although like most of you, I'm furloughed at the moment. And I also have an MSc in optometry, and outside of work, I do a little bit of work with the British Council for Prevention of Blindness that funds research into blindness prevention, and also trustee of Vision Care for Homeless People. So we have run 8 centres around England offering sight tests and glasses to homeless people. I got my email address at the bottom, but I'll put it up again at the end when we finish this session. And I said this is our third in the series of webinars we've been running during the lockdown period. The first sessions of understanding UV light and introduction to low vision aids are available. They were recorded, so you can go back and watch those again. Today you've got the live session on reading body language, and then next week on Monday we've got the fourth one in the series, which will be around understanding contact lenses. So for today around body language, we've got a couple of objectives to cover. First one to look at is the importance of posture and how that can dictate how you interpret your body language. Also looking at the importance of eye contact and the use of facial features and facial expressions, as well as the different parts that your body can play with your hands, arms and feet, and also the concept around personal space, which is a bit different. We go back into practice when we've got to deal with social distancing. So now when somebody does come into practice, they're going to meet you, and when they actually decide to make that buying decision, it's going to be partly based around you. So that creates that first impression of what the patient thinks about you as a person, and that can dictate how that conversation progresses. Obviously, you can do things to change that perception, but what's really important is that first impression, and that's what really makes the biggest impact, because somebody will make their impression about you within 10 to 30 seconds of first meeting you. That will decide how they will interpret from your body language, how you behave, and before you've even spoken to them, they've made some assumptions about you. So that first impression really does matter, and you don't get a second chance for that. So we're thinking before you even opened your mouth, somebody's probably about to make a decision about you just based around your body language and reading that at first impression. Because although we can control what we're saying, when it comes to body language, we're constantly emitting these signals, but we don't have much control. I mean, a lot of it's subconscious, and in a conversation, if your words don't match your body language, that can have a negative impact on that person's perception of you. So when they do come into the practice, are you making eye contact, or are you more slouched and looking around? You've got crossed legs or anything like that? Perhaps you're looking at your watch. Or maybe even you're actually doing it properly and you're sitting nice and upright, open body language, direct eye contact. That first initial greeting when somebody walks in is going much more positive if you are engaged and have a positive posture. And that isn't important just for the first person in the practice, but as a team effort. Because if we all behave in a positive and confident way and create that impression for people come into practice that we know what we're doing, and we constantly improve that and create that good impression to our patients, then that's going to improve the customer service. People are more likely to buy from us and to recommend practice and be more impressed. So body language that actually you can just check up on and see how people are behaving around the practice, because that actually can give you a good indication of what they're really thinking and feeling, even if what they're saying doesn't match that. And there's been quite a lot of research done over many years, so going back to the 70s, where we had Morabian did some research in communication skills, and these numbers here have been quoted in lots of different books on communication skills. So around what makes up a message, we have 7% which is verbal, so the words that you're saying. We then have the vocal at 38%, so that's how you say those words in terms of the pitch, the speed, volume. But we see here the biggest chunk at 55% is actually around the visual. So what someone is taking in visually. That's why it's important that we do think about our body language and how we are portraying ourselves. This was a very good slide taken on the presentation here, but it does pinpoint those sorts of things really, that actually if we are upright with good posture, to make good eye contact, to have that openness in our body language, not having hands in our pockets or holding things in front of us in like a clipboard, something as a barrier, being nice and open, that immediate first impression is being much more positive, and it starts that conversation with the patient to a much better start. And they've already got more positive rapport going on before we've even started speaking. I'm going to cover a lot of these parts now in the next part of the presentation. So we know that appearance is very important, and there are some things that we can all do straight away, I think, without much planning, around being neat and tidy and well dressed. But actually there's much more to it than that as well, around our body language. So whether or not we have got the correct body posture, whether or not we do have a smile on our face and we are making eye contact. And prior to COVID-19, things like a good handshake or a good introduction to start off the conversation. But our body language is more than just a smile and our facial expressions. It is around how we position our head, how we behave with our arms and our hands, and even down to our legs and our feet can all give off signals of how we are feeling. And there's a lot of talk around this open and closed body language. So here we've got something that's more open. So when we say open, that's a case of our body's more exposed. We're not creating barriers across us. We've got things like our arms are open, our hands open to show our palms. We've got our mouth slightly open as well, so that sort of smiling behaviour, versus the closed body language, where we've got things like hands together, arms folded, so again creating those barriers between people. Also, you can do it with your feet or your legs as well, particularly when you're sitting. So if you're sitting and crossing your legs to create that barrier. So an awful lot of talk about open versus closed, and we really want to be using open body language as much as possible within a practice environment, because that's going to create a much better impression with the people coming in. In a consulting room situation, having open body language is more professional and going to help the patient actually open up a bit more in telling us about their problems and giving more honest responses, and they're more likely to elicit information. And so when you're actually out there perhaps dispensing, if you've got that open body language, it's going to create the right impression. Patients will be more receptive to your recommendations and what you have to say. But posture also plays an important role, even when the person isn't in practice, so even on the phone. So when I was a trainee, we had stickers on our phone handsets which said "smile before you dial," and that is very true. is that actually, if you are smiling when you're on the phone, that actually affects the vocalness of your communication. It'll affect how your words come across, and it creates a more positive tone. Similarly, if you're on the phone, actually you've got good posture, so you're upright, shoulders back, head up, that actually will affect your breathing, and it also again affects how your words come across, because you're not going to be mumbling by sitting down. Your words will be clearer, it's going to come across more confident. And that research has shown that time and again, that just by having you got sound, adjusting that vocalness can still make a difference. So thinking about your bodies in general, we're going to start at the top and work our way down to the feet. So think about heads first of all. And when you look up body language, there's an awful lot of talk around making eye contact and how important that is in delivering a message. So we need to make sure that we are making eye contact and looking at our patients, but also by the right amount. And various different authors say the same thing, which really is that we should be following a 70-50 rule. So when you're talking, you need to make eye contact at least 50% of the time. And when you're listening, at least 70% of the time. So that's kind of a ratio between 50 and 70%. If it's less than 50%, then you're perceived as not actually being as engaged or as interested in what the person's saying. If you do it for more than that, so once you get past 80% eye contact, that actually has a negative effect as well, because that can be seen as quite intimidating. It's very intense if someone's almost staring at you. So we need to balance it off. So having eye contact for a big proportion of the time will help to actually create that better rapport with the person you're speaking to or listening to. Now, for some people, making eye contact can be quite difficult. If you're quite insecure or quite shy, then making eye contact can be quite intimidating for them. So there are some tips out there around how you can manage that. So if you're having trouble making eye contact directly at them, try looking at just above their eyes or perhaps the bridge of their nose instead. When you do break your eye contact, try to look to the side rather than looking down. Similarly, when you're blinking, trying to do it in a slow, controlled manner as well. So even though there are quite a few rules around that, but a lot of it really is around actually just looking at somebody can make a big difference to how that message is received. Even though you're saying the same words, just by looking at them can make those words come across in a more positive manner. But our eyes can tell us a lot more than that. So, we know that we normally blink, we do that automatically without thinking about it. But when we're in a stress situation, so when we're anxious or a heightened emotion of, in a stressful situation, we tend to blink more. So that can be down to when perhaps someone's making a complaint, blink rates will go up. So that can give us an indication of how stressed somebody is. We've got the traditional eye roll. So perhaps when someone had enough of the conversation or doesn't agree what you're saying, doesn't believe your message, then we have that eye roll, that breaking of eye contact, and that very deliberate movement of looking up. Similarly with winking, so in a lot of Western cultures that winking is a positive sign. It's that reassurance and that one-to-one communication of non-verbal communication around perhaps a shared joke or perhaps in something, in the extra reinforcing what's been said. And then we've also got that additional bit of flattering the eyelids there for affection as well. So just again with our eyes and using our eyelids, we can communicate different messages as well without having to use words. And the direction of gaze has also been shown to have quite an important effect. So this study has been repeated numerous times over the last 40 years, and it looks at when somebody is talking, is which direction do their eyes move. So if you ask someone to talk about smells, generally they will tend to look upwards. If it's around taste, they tend to look downwards. If you ask them about sounds, they will look to the sides. And if it's visually, you try and get them to perhaps recall something, they're looking upwards and to the side. For the downwards gazes, we have downwards and to the side for recalling that's how they felt at a particular time, and also for internal dialogue. Now these are not shown to be 100% true, but in the majority of cases, this is going to be related to whether you're telling the truth or not. Because what the studies also showed was that people tended to look to their left when they were recalling information from memory. So perhaps they were remembering a place they visited or a sound they heard, or a conversation that they heard. Whereas when they're looking to their right, they're more likely to be constructive, so making up something. So that has been shown there that actually looking to one direction or the other is more likely to be able to spot somebody who's fibbing versus telling the truth. Again, it's not 100%, but it has been shown by several different researchers to be the case for the majority of the time, especially when it's subconscious as well. So it's important as well if we're making eye contact that we're also listening. So we have our two ears and one mouth, so we should be trying to listen more than we speak. And that's a really good sign for a good communicator. But when we're listening, we are also giving off body language still. So someone who tends to be a good listener, you also have things like perhaps they'll do a little bit of nodding of reassurance, or they might put their head to one side. They might do chin touching. What we don't want to see is people start going for their ears, or touching their ears, or going around the back there. Where once that is doing that, that's breaking eye contact and showing they've had enough at that point, and they want to break off the conversation. And a lot of this, again, is subconscious. We don't always realise that we are doing these things of nodding or shaking. A lot of it is that subconscious that we don't have control over. And our faces and our facial expressions are a very good way of supporting that. So, smiling or frowning can make quite a difference. If you smile at somebody, that creates a positive response. And there's been research done in Japan where they got people to smile at strangers. And they did it in a park with some hidden cameras, sent around some volunteers, and they were looking at the public and just smiling at them. And 75% of the time, that stranger smiled back. They reciprocated that smile with another smile. Yet, if a person was frowning, there wasn't that kind of reciprocal response. So therefore, we know that smiling does break the ice. It creates a very good start for a conversation and creates a very positive internal feeling before you've even spoken. But similarly, if you're not smiling, that can immediately affect that initial perception of you before you've even spoken. Now, it doesn't have to be a smile with teeth, it can just be a closed smile, but actually just having that is a very good starting point for any conversation. But what to look out for as well is actually, what else do people do when they're talking? Do they try and cover their mouth? Perhaps try and cover up a lie that they've told? Or another common one is actually, when they've just told a lie, do they then touch their nose? Again, these little subconscious things that people do that can be picked up on to give those little cues back to support, are they actually telling us the truth, do they mean what they say? But in all the research, the biggest thing about facial expression is the smile. So really make sure that you do smile at every patient. So moving on to actual head position. So that can actually dictate as well that feelings in the person you're talking to. So are you coming across as a confident person or friendly by tilting your head? When we say about listening, we know about sort of nodding our head or shaking our head. You know, sometimes if someone's telling you something and you want to agree with them, you can do that nodding. If you disagree, you can shake, or perhaps they're telling you something that's really bad and you end up shaking your head as well in agreement with them. And actually that positioning of to the side or straight on, but also looking up or looking down at somebody can affect that influence around power. And we've got a couple more slides to show that. So most people, when they are listening, will do a slight head tilt. And I say, watch out really for when they start moving their hands at the end. And I say, having that head tilted up or down can really affect the facial expression, but also what information it's giving off. So we've got a picture here of a rather aggressive look here, looking down, but the eyes looking up in a very aggressive format, versus looking down or looking away here with a sign of boredom, breaking the eye contact. So our faces tell a lot, but also we're quite expressive with our hands. Now, if you think within a practice setting, a lot of the time we're sitting down with our patients. They're only looking at our top half, and our hands are a big part of that because the rest of our body is hidden, you know, behind a desk. So what we do with our arms is really important, because having our arms open or closed can actually give that impression whether or not we are open and receptive or whether we're not. So we want to try really and not be sort of folding our arms or crossing our arms over to create these barriers. We want to be fairly open. So back down to our sides, not really putting our hands in our pockets too much, but just having relaxed at the sides or just on the sides. Not like this chap along here, the third one along here, who's got his hands behind, because that's a bit too relaxed, a bit too open. Let's find that natural feeling. But also with our arms, and when we are making these actions, it can also affect our personality. So it tends to be that the bigger someone's personality, the bigger their hand movements will be and arm movements. So someone who's quite internal, quite shy, might end up just moving their hands from side to side. Somebody who's very outgoing, you know, we're not doing bigger arm movements instead to do the same gesture. So they might move their hands and arms outwards, whereas somebody who's quite introverted may just actually keep their arms close to their body, but just have their hands moving. So that again is part of that personality, that subconscious coming through. But what's really important really is that we are not doing these sort of crossing motions here, that we are trying to keep the body language open as much as possible to be receptive and open with our patients as possible. Now, I know some people say before about when they're sitting and what they do with their hands, and actually you can just put them on the table. Some people don't like that. Some people want to put them away. So rather than folding, actually just laying them on your legs, you're still keeping your open body language, but keeping your hands out of the way is fine. Whether on the desk, on your lap, doesn't make as much of a difference to how you come across. But when you're actually in front of somebody and they can see your whole body, that positioning can make a difference. So here in the first picture, we've got that your hands on hips here. That makes your elbows flare out to the side. That creates quite an aggressive, negative stance. So it's not really going to be a good first impression when somebody comes in. In the middle here, we've got that more vulnerable position there of somebody trying to protect themselves. So that can be the hands together. Sometimes it might be actually what we call wrist clutch, where they end up putting their hand over their wrist as well to create that very closed, it brings their shoulders in as well, creating that barrier between them and the other person. Also have that very casual look of actually hands in pockets, which again, from a professional point of view in practice, we don't really want to be doing. And when we are gesturing with our hands, which we do quite a bit actually when you watch people, now you watch one of your colleagues doing a dispense, when you reopen, you'll see that actually a lot of people do move their hands about quite a bit when they're talking. And if somebody's gesturing with their palm up, that's a very positive body language, it's a very positive gesture, and that's seen as a good way, it backs up what you're saying to somebody if you're talking about the benefits and features of a particular product. If it's the other way, and people put in their palms down, that actually tends to normally be more of an aggressive and enforcing route. So that's more like when you're trying to actually push someone towards making a decision. But also, same with actually pointing. Now we know that pointing can be considered as rude, so we tend not to do it. So rather than actually pointing somewhere, try and gesture with your hand, actually with your palm open, to gesture something to go over that way. Actually, rather than just pointing, actually gesturing with your hand and perhaps turning your body as well, will give the same verbal signal, but actually will enforce it in a much better way than pointing. The other thing to remember with hands actually as well is around the nails, and what information that, particularly in a health setting. Now, our nails well kept, not dirty, are the hands clean as well. Obviously, at the moment when we go back, we're going to use a lot of hand sanitizers. We're going to have very, very clean hands. So just so again, here we've got that, for example, of that open body language. So open because the palms are showing. This is a slight turnout. It's not fully out, but just having their palms exposed, create an open gesture. So a lot of politicians are taught to try and speak doing that opening of the palms gesture. Versus on the right here, we've got closed hands, they're together, the palms are together, which is a much more negative response. And you think about somebody who's rubbed their hands together, is more of a greedy, negative perception. So when you're talking to the patient about how much those new individualised 1.7 varifocals cost, we don't really want to be doing it while rubbing our hands together. It doesn't match the, when you're saying a price and doing that, it doesn't go very well. But our hands also give away internal feelings. So here's some examples. So we've got here around touching the hair, so sort of fidgeting, or so it could be playing with hair, playing with glasses, that sort of fidgeting, which someone is actually nervous. They're nervous, they're not at ease, they're a bit anxious. Second picture here, we've got that openness, so that palm's open, so sometimes someone's speaking. Another here, so playing with jewellery, watches, again, that's that fidgeting and that unease. So particularly somebody who's perhaps got to do some public speaking, is very nervous, they're going to play with jewellery, play with things in their pockets, they might hold something like keys and be playing with them, that sort of fidgeting action. They're moving their fingers around in a very anxious way. We've got here aggressive pointing. And then we've got the hand chop here, so again, a very aggressive, perceived quite negative gesture. And that can also be when the sort of people putting their hands, like we said before, about palms down the desk. This is the next stage up from that. Actually, that sort of chop motion there, a very negative signal. Something more positive, so the thumbs up, pretty well internationally known as a good gesture. And then last one here is something called steeping. This is where you have that sort of finger pyramid here, and that tends to be more when someone's thinking quite internally. So not only are they putting their fingers in front, so that's partly creating a barrier, so they're slightly stepping back from the conversation, they're thinking internally, and this is actually a mixing, because this can be perceived as positive or negative, but it also when someone says doing that deep internal thought about how they position their hands and bringing them upwards. So the higher up they bring them, the more they're thinking. So they might do it on a desk, but the higher it is, the more they're internalising before speaking. Now it comes to hand gestures, we'll think about handshaking, and how two people shake hands can determine dominance of the conversation. So whether we have hand over on top of the other versus underneath, or do we have that sideways equality of handshake? And particularly the American press are very hot on watching things like this. So we have here a good picture of Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin here. Putin's hand is very much dominant here, completely on top. Trump underneath, much more submissive. Another one for the American press here. So again, with George W. Bush here. So again, the hand is on top. So it's just showing again who is dominant in the conversation. So who has the upper hand before we've even spoken. So what we're aiming for really is actually more of that side to side, more even equality. So moving further down the body now, thinking about our legs and feet. Now, our legs and feet are much further from our brains, from our hands, so they're much more difficult for us to control. So they're more likely to give away how we're feeling. So particularly think about excessive leg movements, with a sign of is a stress indicator. So it might be someone who's perhaps tapping their foot. Similarly, you think even about children when they sit on a chair and they start dangling and waving their legs around, perhaps they're bored and they don't want to be somewhere. So our excessive leg movement indicates that someone doesn't want to be there, they actually want to walk away, that you don't want to leave that situation. So it's a very negative situation. Similarly, if you've got people that are having a conversation, and although they might be standing looking at each other, make eye contact, if one person's feet start to turn towards the door, that means that for them the conversation is coming to an end. Again, people have seen that before in research of observations about when people are trying to do one-to-one deals, is that they reach the point where one of the pair starts to turn away before the conversation ended. So the indicator really, again, where you want to be heading. So again, trying to actually, when you're talking to somebody, having straight on, having full body aligned towards them is giving that positive impression. But a lot of the time in practice, we're sitting down talking to people. So things to consider here as well is around, again, are we going to have open body language or closed body language? So we don't really want to be having our legs crossed over us like the second person here. There's also something called the ankle lock, where you cross one ankle over the other. And that's a more sign of nerves and being unsure of themselves. Particularly if that person then tucks their legs under their chair, they're bringing them away from the conversation, that's even more anxious and nervous. So ideally we want our feet flat on the floor, like this third person here, knees fairly together but not touching. That's a much more open body language. Now in terms of actually our knees, we want to, if they're less than 10 centimetres apart, that still seems quite closed. Whereas most people tend to sit more naturally with their knees about 10 to 30 centimetres apart. That's quite a neutral seating position. But once you exceed 30 centimetres, that starts to become more dominant and aggressive, particularly once you get to around 45 centimetres, that seems very dominant and controlling and very aggressive seating position. Then just how we're sitting can affect, but if someone's coming in and over towards us to sit down, if we're sitting there legs wide or legs fully crossed, it doesn't create a very good first impression. So next thing that follows on from that is around personal space. So within optometric practice, we do get quite close to patients. So in the consulting room, so also at the moment, the advice from the professional bodies is that ophthalmoscopy, being shown here on the ophthalmoscope, shouldn't be taking place. We should do it a further away, for example, using a slit lamp to keep a bit more distance between patients. But outside the consulting room, we're doing facial measurements or perhaps checking the fit of a frame. We have to encroach on someone's personal space. So again, that's going to be slightly different when we go back into practice and have to try and socially distance. But traditionally, thinking about when you're doing, perhaps taking a PD measurement, when you have to go in, if you're using a pupillometer, you do get extremely close to people, usually less than 30 centimetres. Even when you're using a PD ruler, you might do it at arm's length, but it's still fairly close to the patient. Whereas using one of the digital measuring systems, like Hoyer's, Shamir will do, they've done a much more natural distance, and you haven't got to encroach on that person's personal space. So there's different zones that have been devised, and effectively the better you know somebody, the more relaxed you are with them, the closer they can get before it triggers a negative response. So the outermost zone is the speaking or audience zone. So but for most people on stage presenting, they tend to be at quite a distance from people. But when we're actually having a conversation with somebody, usually at work, or perhaps chatting to somebody, we have a more social zone. That's something that you might not know very well, but you are having perhaps a one-to-one conversation rather than a group conversation. Closer than that, we have the friend zone. So this is once we know people much better, they can get that much closer, to up to 45 centimetres. And having that much closer trust, they can get much closer, we don't feel uncomfortable. So even when you're doing something at arm's length, like taking a PD measurement, you're still kind of in that sort of friend zone. That's why it's important to have that good rapport with the patient first, is that they're going to feel more comfortable in that zone. We then get into that intimate zone, so within 45 centimetres. And with that, someone's got to trust somebody really, really well to feel comfortable in that close space. So even when you're trying to check the fit behind someone's ears, normally, you have to get quite close to them. So whenever you enter that intimate space, so less than 45 centimetres, we should really be gaining verbal consent from the person before we enter that close, or give them some warning. Now, I'm just going to check behind your ears, is that okay? Because we're entering that really, really close proximity, that can create internal stress factors within somebody. And we know that being too close to somebody has very negative consequences. So if somebody is really close, that's seen as very pushy, very aggressive. And let's say in the first picture, you've got two people actually are smiling, so each other very well, so they can get that close. Versus our two commuters here on the right, where we've got that real invasion. They're coming over well within the intermediate zone, doesn't know or trust that person, a very negative response. But it's also the fact that if we do things too far away, they can be seen as standoffish or very distant. Now, obviously, when we go back at the moment, we've got social distancing. That's going to change things a little bit. And that's why it's really important for us to try and overcome that and actually create things like a very good personal appearance, good body image. Is going to help to try and still build that rapport from a further distance. We haven't got a luxury of being in that social zone, chatting to the patient. So the reminder around body language really is that we want to try and keep things open. We don't want to be crossing our arms, our hands, our feet, our legs. We want to try and be as open as possible, fairly relaxed, whilst maintaining good posture. When we're talking to somebody, think about how we do that. So are we leaning forward slightly? Are we doing perhaps the head tilt to one side? following up with things like a little bit of nodding when they're talking. And also about the importance of eye contact. So we said about the 50-70 rule. So when you're talking, eye contact at least 50% of the time, and when you're listening, aim for about 70%. So we don't want to go less than 50, because that's shown as being uninterested in the conversation. If we go past 80%, we've got that very staring, dominant, aggressive appearance. Remember what it says well about our hands. So trying to have, showing the palm, having that open gesture, even when we put our hands on the desk or on our lap. We're trying to sort of display ourselves as much as possible to the patient. Now, there's lots of books out around body language and lots of different courses you can take. If you look around body language in business, there's always sections around something called mirroring. So with mirroring, what we try and do is actually one person starts to imitate the other person's body language in order to try and gain control of the situation and to try and create a more positive rapport with them. So here's another photo from an American newspaper here. So we've got some mirroring going on here, both crossing over their legs and putting their hands in the middle, both leaning in. So mirroring each other. When you've got two people doing that, that's shown actually that they are communicating well, there starts to be more respect going on, and that between the two people there's much more positive rapport. And also they're much more in agreement as well. Whereas the opposite, if you have them leaning away, then they might both be thinking the same thing, but in a negative way. Whereas here they're both leaning in, so they both think the same, but it's both positive. So you can see people that actually change their body language in response to somebody else. Some of that subconsciously, some people do it deliberately in order to try and steer the conversation. What's really important with body language, I know we've talked a lot about individual parts of the body during this session, but you really think actually we need to look at the body as a whole, so not focus just on what are their hands doing, but it's about actually overall, what signal are they giving off? So looking, from most people when they look at somebody, will start at the eyes and work downwards. But when somebody does come in, they've got that 10 to 30 seconds to make their mind up about you. It's actually that scanning the body, what is the general signal being given off? And then when you start talking, does your verbal message match the vocal and the visual? So think about Mason Reagan's 3 P's of vision about verbal, vocal, visual. Do those three things all actually match up? Or is there miscommunication? Are they saying one thing, but their body is giving off a signal that's different to that? So it's quite important that it's not just about one aspect, it's the whole thing. And although we control our words, it's our bodies that's going to give away how we really feel in the situation. So we talk about whole body listening, thinking about all the bits we covered here. So we said about eyes and eye contact, pointing our feet at the person rather than the door. Make sure we've got our bodies fully facing somebody, not slightly turned away. Thinking about our facial gestures and with our mouths and with our hands. Because that whole aspect of the body, all the different parts will give us that positive message. And if you look online, there's all sorts of different advice and tricks that are given around how to use body language in a positive way to create good rapport with people, and how to make sure that you show yourself off in the most positive way possible, and that will create the best first impression. So there's quite a bit on this slide. If you go back after this session and download the handout, then this is all on there a bit more clearly if you want to go back and read it all later. But as I say, there's whole books out there just on body language. So what we've done today is really give a very brief overview of what those books are going to tell you more about if you're more interested in learning about it. So that's the overview done. At the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button. If you click that, it allows you to type in some questions, and we'll try and answer those now. That's my email address at the bottom here. So if you've got any questions around body language communication you want to ask and want to ask later on, then feel free to email me on that address. Or if you want to ask it now, then put it in the Q&A box. And we'll do those in a moment. Just a reminder, at the start, we said that this was part of the series of webinars between Psychcare and Instructional Training. Next week, we have our fourth one in the series, which will be on Monday, which will be at 2 o'clock. And we're going to be covering an OA guide to contact lenses. So that's going to be just going over some of the basics of contact lens, around what are the main types of contact lenses out there, a little bit about the advantages of contact lenses and the different modalities, as well as trying to give people a bit more confidence around some of the common questions that the patients will ask about contact lens wear, just to boost your confidence in practice with contact lenses. That's next Monday at 2 o'clock. And again, that's free to attend, thanks to Psychcare. So before we go to questions there, just a reminder, you can contact me by email. You can look at Insight on our Twitter or Instagram. Look at one of our courses and qualifications for optical support staff. Look up the optical assistant apprenticeship that's coming soon, register interest, as well as our bespoke training and CET. For those of you that are Psychcare members, I know a lot of you are. We've had over 150 on this today, so most of you are Psychcare members. But if you go to the Psychcare website and look up training, you'll find information around the Psychcare training that we do there. Some of that is around workshops which can be suspended, but if you go to that page and scroll to the bottom, you'll find all the information about the Optical Academy, where there's 10 standalone online modules there. They're all quite short course, only take a couple of weeks to do. Those cover things like frames, lenses, optical screening, optical anatomy. Just have a look on there because Psychcare members do get a significant discount with those. So that's in the slides bit. I'm just going to have a little look now what questions we've got that come in. Okay, got a couple of questions around PPE. So one question about somebody asking about how do patients at ease in full PPE. So yeah, that's a good question there. A lot of that is going to be around how we can control the bits that people can see. So I see another question about using a mask, and that obviously creates an obstruction, and wearing PPE itself does create a barrier between people. But when you're in PPE, you can still create open body language, so we can still make sure that we are there without our arms crossed, that we are still being open, and that's still going to create a good impression. When people come in, we're not going to be shaking hands, but you can still wave to patients, you can still make eye contact through your mask and visors. So that's those aspects of eye contact and open body language are still really, really important, because we're not going to have the advantage of always being able to smile if you're masked. I know from the practices that I've seen on, put pictures online of having these perspex barriers around the reception desk, and part of having those is that there's less need for masks, so that can still help to create that smile impact when people come in. Whether or not we can go down the route of finding masks that perhaps are a bit more clear to be able to show the mouth, I don't know. But yeah, within PPE, we can still have that openness of our body language to control. And we can still make sure that when we are speaking to patients that we are still having that eye contact. And that eye contact is really important as well with optometrists. So they're going to start doing virtual triaging, so sort of online consultations where the patient can only see a little bit of the person. So having that eye contact is still going to be really, really important, because that's going to make quite a big difference to how that person thinks and whether you're listening to them or paying attention or not. So that was the two questions there. If someone's got any more, let's have a look. That one. yeah, then we're going about masks. But I think we're in this situation really, just wearing the mask is really better than trying not to. Perfect. Lovely. This one's got any more questions? Hopefully I'll see most of you next week on Monday for the 4th of these sessions. Other than that, yeah, have a good week. And hopefully next week things will be a little bit clear what we're going to be doing when some of us will be going back into work. So until then, enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.